Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Ratna from the AHA Center. Welcome to HELiX Focus Session. Our session today will be hosted by Thammasat Business School and Singapore University of Social Sciences, SUSS. Dr. Ruth, Banomyong, the session is yours.
Thank you very much, Ratna, and a very warm welcome to everyone joining this session. So today we're going to look at this issue of how do we measure satisfaction of humanitarian efforts, but from the perspective of the beneficiary themselves. And allow me to introduce my co-presenter, Dr. Huay Ling from Singapore University of Social Sciences. She has been working on a lot of humanitarian issues, and we decided to do a double act today. We also need to say that we need to acknowledge the support from Help Logistics in terms of the research that is being presented and the network that we have under Vanasi. So in terms of the agenda itself, allow me just to say why did we choose this topic and why did we felt this topic was important. And then my colleague, Dr. Huay Ling, will share a case study from Singapore looking at this specific issue. Whereas for me, I will talk about a proposed model that could be used, that has been tested, that has been validated, but could be used to explore further into beneficiaries' satisfaction. And then the floor will be open for discussion and way forward. So why this topic? Well, very often when you look at the literature related to humanitarian logistics, humanitarian supply chain, a lot of the focus is on how these organizations, in fact, coordinate, improve their capability, how do they respond better. But there is one area that probably has been under research, which is the perspective of the beneficiaries themselves, those who are receiving the aid. Sometimes I have even heard that, yes, because there are the vulnerable, sometimes we don't even listen to what they think or what they hear because the organization know better, or it is a matter of urgency and things need to be delivered to them very, very quickly. So there is this type of gap that exists, and we want to discuss this issue from the perspective of service, the service performance of the organization itself. How is it perceived? How is it considered? How it is appreciated by the respondents, by the beneficiaries when they are receiving the aid? So the first one will be a case study from my colleague Huay Ling, and then I will finish the session with a humanitarian service performance framework, which has been tested and validated in Thailand. So Huay Ling, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Just a quick sound check. Is it everyone can hear me well? Is it okay?
Well, I can hear you, so I think I hope other people can hear you.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, depending on where you are joining us here today. Thank you very much for attending this focus session. I hope that both Ruth and myself will be able to give you some thought-provoking discussion and conversation later. Right. So my part will be sharing a little bit on a case study that we have done here in Singapore on the application of Lean Six Sigma to enable an effective fulfillment of beneficiary needs. So here, can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So this will be the content that I'll be covering, some brief background and motivation of this applied research project. What is our objective, right? And what is the literature talking about in terms of the application of lean technology, lean methodology and Lean Six Sigma in the non-profit organization and charity organization to meet beneficiary needs. The research methodology that we have used, what are the types of primary data that we've collected for this applied project. We'll share a little bit about our findings, what are some of our key learnings, end off with the conclusion of, and of course there's limitation in the study, and some of our recommendation and future directions. And I think the entire session, my part as well as the Ruth part, will finish first before we move on to Q&A. Thank you for that. Next slide, thank you. So about Singapore, I guess when I talk about Singapore, people will think about Orchard Road, right? Vivo City, Sentosa, Marina Bay Sands, right? All the shopping malls and the rich and fluent, right? But yeah, indeed, Singapore ranked as the world's first most food secure nation on the Global Food Security Index in 2018. Nevertheless, food insecurity does exist among certain segments of the society. So what do we mean by food insecurity? It's defined as a state of being without reliable is the keyword, reliable access to sufficient quantity or affordable nutritious food. So quantity as well as quality, it has to be considered, because we are talking about providing nutritious meal that meets the beneficiary needs, right? So in an earlier study in 2018, right, by the Liat Center of Social Innovation Research in Singapore, they found that 1 out of 10, meaning 10% of Singaporeans actually face food insecurity issues, right? Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. And surprisingly, food insecurity was not limited to only the lowest income households in Singapore, right? It can be due to, access issue in terms of mobility, like for example, elderly, they are not able to get out of their house to get meals, right? So, and of course, the lower income group, as well as people who are incarcerated, and there's other causes as well. So we found that 27% of the participants have an average household monthly income of 2,000 and above. This means that it's not only the lower income group facing food insecurity issues. This is the broad background of the issues with regards to food insecurity in Singapore. And that's where there's an urgency to look into these issues. And in Singapore context, there's a number of food support groups that are actually helping to meet these gaps, right? To bring food to the beneficiaries who are deemed as food insecure. And can I have a next slide, please? And one of these this type of food support network in Singapore is a network called Food Bank. I'm sure some of y'all here might heard of Food Bank, because it doesn't only, this concept, food banking, doesn't only exist in Singapore, right? It exists in the region, in Australia, in Europe, in US as well, right? So we do have a food bank in Singapore. Food bank is just one of them. There's also other kind of food support agency, right? And typically, this is the process or the workflow that they perform in bringing food donation to the beneficiaries. So in general, there's 3 main sources of food donations. One is from the retail donation, like your supermarket, right? The public donations, like as an individual, I want to donate my excess food, or even, bring some food that's nearing to expiry, right? But are still in good condition and are nutritious, right? There's also corporate donors, definitely. So all these 3 sources will go to food bank, right, and be collected by the logistics staff and distributed before distribution to the beneficiary. They can be stored in a warehouse. Sometimes if they are whole and in bulk, they can be readily shipped to the charities, right? So typically in a warehouse, what the volunteers do is to sort the food items, right? And then place them in the shelving area and then pack them. So basically the common warehouse operations is carried out here in food bank warehouse context, right? So packing, sorting, packing, bundling, right? And all these, the key thing is done by volunteers. So all these volunteers are not so-called trained personnel, right? With warehouse operations experience. So they can be ad hoc volunteers, right? And then once they are packed, they will be stored on a pallet before being delivered by, of course, the logistics staff. And during COVID time, what we see interestingly is because everybody is working from home, right? So there's actually a larger pool of volunteers who volunteer and people who have got their own transport to volunteer to provide the last mile logistics to the beneficiaries, right? And typically all these are being done through a so-called food pantry, a store within a certain estate of Singapore. Right, but there has been some changes, right? Because Food Bank wanted to do something that provide access for provide beneficiary with access to nutritious food 365 days, 24 hours, and the best of which is contactless. So what they did was, can I have the next slide, please? At the last next slide, please. Ruth, can I have the next slide? Thank you. And the food vending machine initiative, right? Before, can you go up? Before that, thank you very much. So
this one, huh?
Yeah,
okay.
This one, thank you. So this is the, sorry, before this. Okay, yeah, thank you. Maybe there was some lag, it's okay, no worries. So the food vending machine initiative that was launched by Food Bank was launched in October 2019, right? And Food Bank, just now I mentioned, was a foundation or a charity registered as a charity in Singapore, founded in 2018 to eradicate hunger in Singapore by their broad vision is 2025. So we got in touch with them to help them to so-called look into their internal process of replenishing, how to effectively replenish the food vending machine so as to meet the beneficiary needs, right? So the Food Pantry 2.0 is this food vending machine initiative that was launched in October 2019. It first started with only 3 vending machines, right? All these are automated, right? It's just like you can just buy your drinks. I'm sure most of you all here would be very familiar with, because I guess this is very common in Asian context, right? Vending machine located. So the 3 vending machines are located in the central part of Singapore, right? This region indicated by the red circle here. And by the time I assembled all this material, right? They have already started to expand the network to eastern as well as western part of the island. The broad vision is to deploy 100 vending machines island-wide. So all this is with the vision also cutting down or effective use of the limited resources, and most importantly, effective use of the limited volunteers and manpower, right, in food banks, right? And also to effectively meet the beneficiary needs. Okay.
Sorry, I think we had some connection. We've had some connection problem. So allow me to go back.
Yeah.
Yeah, you may continue. Sorry.
Thank you. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So this is the broad objective. We wanted to make use of Lean Six Sigma. Lean Six Sigma is basically a process improvement methodology on this replenishment, on this process which involves the replenishment of the food vending machine, right? So the key idea here is to make use of voice of customer, which is really an important philosophy under Lean Six Sigma. right, to map out the as-is process for the vending machine replenishment by identifying the supplier, the inputs, the outputs, as well as the customer, which is also commonly known as SIPOT, right? SIPOT map, right? And we also want to measure and analyze the current food packing process for replenishing the vending machine, right? So using very simplistic tools like spaghetti diagram, process value, and time analysis tools. So in order to then, once we understand the current process, the as-is process, then we can then propose a feasible solution that is also very simple, standard, and not complicated at all for the volunteers to follow, right? Because the end of the day, the objective is really to come up with something simple in order to sustain, right, for food bank. So we make use of 5S methodology. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So when we scan through the literature, there were Lean Six Sigma definitely is not a foreign idea for non-profit organization. It has been applied, right? And mainly also to in terms of reduction of lead time, reduction in process time, right, and faster inventory turnover, right? So and all this is with the aim to really make effective use of the limited resource in terms of capital, manpower, as well as technology, right? Typically, all these non-profit organizations, very similar to Humanitarian, right, network, are very limited in terms of manpower and capital as well, right? Can next slide, please? So what we did was we make use of action research method. So what we did was we really went into food bank to participate in the packing process of the replenishment for replenishing the food vending machine, which really includes the sorting, packing, and the food bundling, which is essentially the inbound as well as the outbound process of the food donations until it reaches the food vending machine, right? At the respective at the pilot site that we're looking at, the central part of Singapore. So what are some of the primary data that we collected? We measure the time taken to complete each activity, right? Tedious stuff, but we went through that with some help of the, with a number of volunteers and students, right? In the overall process, we measure each of the activities, right, from the start to the end, and the type and quantity of the expired food. The kind of food that we're looking at here is mainly dry rations, right, and food that are that have an expiry of about up to about the most 2 months, 4 weeks to 2 months, right? And we make use of voice of customer, which is really to go down to the field to listen to what the beneficiary needs, right? So the customer here, right, is really our beneficiaries of the food of the vending machine, right? That retrieve food bundle from the vending machine to understand specifically their dietary needs and preference. Can I get next slide, please? Thank you. So we went through the support mapping. We identify the supplies that's coming from within the warehouse itself. The supplies definitely is from the manager. He provides the food items with less than 2 months shelf life, right? Then the supervisor that provide the number of empty cabins, which is the cabin holes in the vending machine that we need to replenish. And usually each cabin hose has to be replenished with 2 or 3 dry stuff, right? And so that we can determine how to best pack the food bundles. And of course, our inputs are also the volunteers that provide their labor in helping with the food packing and replenishing of the vending machine. And this is in general the simple the workflow that has been carried out. So typically the food will be shelled and assembled, packed. Then in fact, this was the as-is. There was a lot of unnecessary so-called movement of boxes and assembly of boxes in the initial state before the food bundles are ready for delivery, right? Can I have the next slide, please? So just now I mentioned, we identified that the outputs from the warehouse is really the boxes that are sealed and labeled and to be ready for delivery to the vending machine. And of course, the output at the food pantry 2.0, which is the vending machine side, is making sure that the cabby holds are fully replenished to the maximum capacity, right? And how it works is, just now if you remember the images of the food vending machine, they allow contactless withdrawal of food bundles because all the beneficiaries are provided with a bank card, so-called. It's like a fund, right? Which is like a fund or voucher, which they can, it's like a digital voucher, so to speak, which allows them to redeem food bundles based on the credit that's preloaded in the bank card, right? And it was also open to the general public, mainly cater for the lower income group who can also buy food bundles at $2 per bundle from the vending machine, right? So the beneficiaries were interviewed, and what we found was in the process, their common needs, or I would say preference, is really for staples like your rice, your noodles, like your cereals, your oats, and beverages, your Milo, your HELiX, all those, yeah, the nutritious meal. And some of them also purchase canned food as condiment together to make their own cooking, right? So what there's less preferred are really those snacks, the biscuit and you know, I would say junk food, but unfortunately, the real case in, you know, a lot of the donations are sometimes a lot from the public are the snacks and biscuits, right? Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah. So we also did the spaghetti diagram to understand the internal material and movement of the whole packing process. What we have found, I won't bore you with the, you know, with this, is there's a lot of, you know, redundant or duplication in terms of walking to and forth between the packing area and the food storage area, right? Sometimes because of the, you know, inexperience, or because the volunteers are clueless, you know, about what is the best way to move around and to do the packing, right? And that results in the congestion, right? And also a big part of the reason was also the warehouse wasn't really so-called arranged or laid out in such a way that enable an efficient flow of the packing and of the sorting and packing process, right? So can I have the next slide? So the original flow, we measured for a typical 3 volunteers, right? The 27 step was the original flow, right? And we used the process value and time analysis tools, which is the PVTA, to determine the importance of each activity in terms of, does it provide value at all, right? And how long is each activity actually taking? Is it taking too long? So a typical workman of 3 volunteers took 61 minutes and 30 seconds, right, to complete the entire packing process. And we also found that shelving of the food items was actually non-value adding, because they actually, once they are shelved, maybe in a few hours, they are already needed for packing, right? So the movement of some of the boxes within the temporary storage area was also deemed as non-value adding, because they could have been avoided if there was sufficient space, because the space was cluttered. There wasn't sufficient space for them to move to the outbound process, and resulting in them having to, you know, make a temporary storage, right? So we also found that of course the packing of the food is a key value adding steps, right? Because we need to bundle it in the most optimum manner to meet what the beneficiary wants, right? But a lot of the bundling, in the process of bundling, sorting, looking out for food to the right bundle, when volunteers having to determine what to bundle, a lot of they actually took a lot of time, because there was a lot of ambiguity. Volunteers are unsure what to pack, how much to pack, right? All this wasn't really communicated really well, right? And given that the fact volunteers are only there, let's say on an ad hoc basis, it creates even more complexity in the entire process. So they also use paper and pen to record information, which actually takes up a lot of time, right? So can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So what we did when we went in was we went through the, we are really looking for simple solution, no rocket science, right? Low hanging fruits that can be implemented simply, right? It's like we are trying to do a Marie Kondo of the entire workspace, right? So what we went through brainstorming with the supervisor and manager of food bank, what can be done, what is low-hanging fruits that we can implement right away, right? So we come up with a food bundling method very much based on VOC, based on what we have spoken, what we have learned or talk about in the field. We actually went down to talk to those people who retrieve food items from the food vending machine, right? And work together with the food bank personnel to come up with certain food items that we must have so-called have reserved from the food bank warehouse. Taking note that this vending machine process is not the only route for providing food to the beneficiaries, right? So there's different routes. So we have to make sure we kind of reserve ring-fence some of the food items for this process. And we standardize the packing list for the volunteers to easily follow. And we use a so-called electronic food checkout form. Yeah, and all these are in categories of staples. Like we basically classify the items in categories of food staples, like snacks and biscuits, beverages, and condiment, right? And halal or non-halal, also very important, right? Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. And so this was, if you look at this slide, right, it was really the, in the whole process, we apply 5S methodology. And the diagram that you see 1, 2, 3, and 4 from right to the from left to the right is the before, left is the before, and the right is the after. So, right. So you see that we have so-called even up the storage space loading. Before that, there was actually overuse of shelf on certain portion of the rack. So what we did was some decluttering of the workplace through removing unnecessary items. So the racks are also arranged according to the flow of the packing list, which involves the staples, canned food, beverages, condiment, biscuits, and snacks. Remove all the unnecessary cabinets and replace them for a proper station or table for the volunteers to record information. Right, so the entire workplace was also tidied up after all this so-called tidying up. It's like doing an entire Marie Kondo of the workplace. Thank you. Next slide, please. Yeah. So we standardized the replenishment frequency of the vending machine, right? And by the way, you must be wondering, the vending machines are also, in fact, adopted by commercial, the private sector, some business owners. And in this case, in this pilot site, it was adopted by a store called Creamery, which is a cafe selling ice cream, snacks, and, coffee for people to chill, right, within their estate, right? So they are also trying, it's part of their CSR, in fact. So to go back, when we apply 5S, the standardized step was when we standardized the replenishment cycle, right? And to make sure that the items are packed according to the needs of the beneficiary per day, per location, right? And after the streamlining of the process, we are able to pack 2 replenishment sets at the same time for the volunteers, right? And sustaining, what we did was we make sure the manager and the supervisor went through the packing activities together with us so that he or she are familiar with the new process, able to adopt it, find that it's okay, right, manageable. And we also hand over the necessary documentation, such as the electronic checkout form and the standardized packing list. We handed over to the food bank supervisor. Next slide. So this the after process was after we run through it, we trial it, right? We found that there was actually a 36% reduction in the time taken, right? Which is which amounts to 20%, 20 minutes. Initially was like 61 minutes and more, and we actually only need 2 volunteers instead of 3, right? We actually cut down the manpower, and that was the final state of the packing activity of the area for packing, for the packing activities. Can I have next slide?
Has the next slide arrived?
Yeah. Implication. I think it could have skipped. Wait, I think there is a little bit of lag. Wait, I'm also checking my own slides. Results and okay, yeah, good. The next slide. This is correct. Thank you. And for implication and conclusion, of course, by using a problem-based approach, using problem-solving approach, using define, measure, analyze, improve, and control, which is really very much of the the methodology under Lean Six Sigma. It provided us with a very guided approach, step-by-step approach, for improving the replenishment process of the food vending machine, which is really to enable beneficiaries to also select what they want, right? It gives them the opportunity to choose what they want to purchase, so-called, for the vending machine, right? And the voice of customer, I quote, I bracket, voice of beneficiary, enable the needs of, by listening to them, we actually enable a more effective meeting of their needs, right? And simple tools like your spaghetti diagram, PVTA, SciPod actually allows all this inefficiency to be recognized and to be presented. What is the beauty of this is visual. It allows food bank personnel to be convinced, right? So, and at the end of the day, when they adopt the new process, the supervisor has more control over the process of, instead of having to leave a lot of ambiguity to the volunteers, where a lot of times lost and wasting time deciding on what to pack, and also give much more complexity in terms of, at the end of the day, lead time is lengthened, right? The food mix may also be so-called messed up if the volunteers are not following standard packing lists, right? Next slide, please. So limitation, definitely. We are only listening to the beneficiary that's located in the central part of Singapore. And given that we are, Food Bank is launching this island-wide, definitely the voice of other beneficiaries from the other sides have to be, assessed to have a more accurate assessment of all the beneficiary needs, right? We also hope moving forward, maybe we can also work with them. In fact, we are in talks to consolidate all the demand of the vending machines across different sites when this is launched in greater scale. And also to explore the integration of the packing and replenishing activities for the vending machine as part of the overall warehouse activity. Currently, as I've mentioned, this food replenishment for the food vending machine is not the only activity that exists in the warehouse, right? There can be sometimes, when they do certain programs, they could have an entire corporates, volunteers that come in to do packing. So sometimes there has to be a need for integrating and reconfiguring the warehouse activities. And currently, they are not using barcode, right? Hopefully, or even QR code. Hopefully, more electronic means can be adopted, by, of course, at a cost-efficient manner, right, to streamline information flow. Not only from what we are receiving from the donors, the supply side, but also linking to the demand side, what the beneficiary needs. So really, the idea of using technology is to bridge the information from supplies, the donors upstream, as well as the beneficiaries, the customer. Moving forward, how can we do better? Thank you. Ruth, next slide. So this is really the key priorities. We want to close up the gap. We want to listen to the voice of customer. Go back, please. And yeah, and how do we do that? Is to accelerate digitalization. Okay, thank you. Anyway, we want to encourage donating, right? Giving what the beneficiary needs, give better. And a key important thing is also dignity of choice, right? So beneficiaries are also, you know, you and me, right? We are all human. They should have the dignity of choice. So whatever we are trying to close up here is also has to be needs driven, their needs, based on their needs, beneficiary needs. So that at the end of the day, is operational, we will attain operational efficiency and meet their needs effectively. Thank you. Next slide, please. So these are a few key pillars that hopefully can be brought forward. Acceleration of digitalization could bring opportunities for, you know, management of beneficiaries as well as volunteers, as well as donors, right? More use of digital payment or e-vouchers, e-meal vouchers, right? There could be, definitely there has to be a partnership. I think partnership collaboration is very important, even in this whole thing about digitalization, right? Tap on donors, tap on beneficiaries, communities, and there has to be a greater online presence, both for crowdfunding, crowdsourcing of volunteers, as well as fundraising. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, so this is our broad vision, hopefully, that we are looking at possibly putting forward, streamlining it for the, is really to have critical partnership and digitalization, right? So I think it's very similar to work with different parties, beneficiary, food sources, to get food funding and, you know, to streamline our internal operations, to cut down on duplication, work with the private sector in terms of, in fact, there are all these food support network are also getting a lot of support from commercial sector in terms of last mile logistics, in terms of transport and warehouse expertise, right? And to make use more of established platform, digital platform, partners with more corporates and as well as educational institution, right? To reach out to greater, in order to meet the beneficiary needs. And of course, secure corporate donation. Okay, I think next slide. I think this is a little bit of repetition of just now, whatever I've said. I think that's all for me. I don't want to take out too much time. I will leave the rest of the time to Ruth. These are the list of our reference. I hope the case study provided some thoughts to the participants here. And thank you for listening. I'm happy to address any question at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Huay Ling. I think it's quite fascinating because when we think about Singapore, we don't think that there is a problem such as this. And I already saw in the chat that there is a couple of questions which you may want to look at, and then we can answer them in the end. So from my side, it's slightly different. It's a proposition from the Thailand team, from the Thammasat team, where we're in fact trying to look at developing a framework or a tool to assess the service performance of humanitarian organization from the perspective of beneficiaries. So that's why we've given it a nice name, which is the HUMSERVPERF. But yeah, it also shows that there is also a link in terms of what we try to do with what already exists in the commercial environment. So when you look at the humanitarian literature itself, when aid is provided, it is in fact a service, which is a very important aspect of the various relief operation. But one of the things that we have not really seen that much in the humanitarian literature is this discussion on service quality itself. You know, what is the service quality, especially from this perspective of the beneficiary? How do they actually perceive. And the example that Huay Ling presented, I think is interesting, is yes, you have the supply side, but then you also have the demand side itself. And if any relief organization cannot satisfy the needs of its beneficiaries, so this is a reflection of its performance, of course, but it also decreases its reputation and at the same time may affect future funding. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. We talk a lot in the humanitarian literature is that humanitarian organizations have basically two customers. First customers are, of course, the beneficiaries, but then you also have another customer who are in fact the donors who provide, especially in cash donation, that are very important. So both sides needs to be satisfied, at least see that the humanitarian organization is doing a good job. So if the HRO, the humanitarian organization, has a good performance when meeting the needs of the beneficiaries, then it can help ensure the long-term funding of the organization itself. So that's really the initial reaction when we went through the literature and we were trying to understand what we could do. So for the humanitarian supply chain, there's a lot of challenges when you're trying to research or explore this specific topic. First one is, of course, the disaster itself, the type of this disaster. And for anyone who is interested in it, there's a lot of work that has been done by Luc Wassenhover from INSEAD, where he looked at the various types of disaster, sudden, slow onset, man-made, or natural, and the various ways in terms of how you could respond. But then you also have the challenges based on the phases of the relief operation. Is it a response phase? Is it a recovery phase? Or is it a preparedness phase? The challenges are different. And last but not the least, in any event, you have multiple stakeholders. Not only humanitarian organization, but you also have the commercial sector. You may have the army, the various government units. So it can be quite a complex environment. And we must not forget the beneficiaries themselves. So relief organizations do acknowledge that the donors are one of the main customers along with the beneficiaries. So that, I think, is a given. But what we have not really seen is the mechanism for the beneficiaries themselves to be able to represent their needs. We can use the word voice of customers, but it's really about knowing if their needs have been actually met or not. Maybe because there's no way for them to have formal representation in a disaster situation or when you're in a refugee camp. But this is something that is lacking or that we have not really seen in the literature itself. So when I refer to the literature, I would say that what has been studied, what has been researched, maybe it exists on an ad hoc basis or it's already practiced in the field, but we have not been able to gather evidence in order to be able to write maybe as a best practice or in terms of knowledge management. And usually when we look at the measures of relief services that are developed, first of all, they do come from the organization's own perspective, such as the number of tons delivered, number of containers landed, number of aid users fed, a number of relief staff arriving promptly, or even the number of budget used. So when you look at these type of key performance indicators, it's really very much a focus on the operational aspect in terms of what has been done. But usually we do not see this focus on beneficiaries' perceptions towards the service offered. And some of the research in the literature also said that the existing measures, they need to be more quantitative so that they are tangible. You can really actually see them. Whereas when we talk about satisfaction, it is intangible, and it is very, very difficult to say if they are valid or not. So this is really, I think there's a problem statement in terms of how do you actually deal with that. So this is where we decided to look at what already exists in the commercial environment. And in commercial supply chain, there has been a lot of literature related to the fact that what can be taken from commercial supply chain and could be used or adapted for humanitarian supply chain, but also vice versa, where what is best practice in humanitarian supply chain can also be used in commercial supply chain. So from a marketing perspective, from a service industry perspective, it is very clear. It is the customer that determines the service quality. And that is a key concept. You have probably heard, yes, in marketing, they always say customer is the king. So it is a customer that determines the service quality. Problem is, we are in a different context. And what we have seen is that, yeah, it's not really the beneficiaries that determine the service quality. But what is also important when you look at relief operation, it's not just, the provision of aid, but it's also the behavior and the manners of the field staff, the volunteers, the people that are working in the field, in the disaster area. How are they behaving? Also, of late, I have seen quite a lot of things where they were referring to some international organization where their staff were not behaving properly. So when you look at the commercial literature, especially the marketing literature, we identify two tools or two frameworks that could be used in a humanitarian context. The first one is what we call the SERVQUAL, or the service quality. And in the service quality, it was developed at the end of the 1980s. And it basically looked at the difference between the perception of expectation, that means what did the customers expected, and what was the perception of what they actually received, right? So they were looking at the gap. So that was the SERVQUAL. And then after the SERVQUAL, because in the SERVQUAL, you had to ask the question, what did you think before? And then what did you think after? Some other scholars said, well, the SERVQUAL is not that good, could not really answer this question. So they've developed a similar tool, which is called the HUMSERVPERF, or the service performance. So just to share with you the similarity or the differences. So the dimensions are the same. So that means that service quality or service performance, what does it look at? One, it looks at reliability of the service. It looks at the responsiveness of the service. It looks at the tangibility of the service, the assurance given by the service provider, and also the empathy of the people of the service provider when they're dealing with their customers. But the assumption is very different. In the SERVQUAL, when you identify the service quality, it's in fact equal to the expectation minus performance perception. This is what I was talking about a few moments ago. You have two sides from the beneficiary perspective. The first side is the expectation of the service, and the second side is the perception of the service received. So that is the assumption under the SERVQUAL. In the service performance, it's basically service quality equal to the performance perception only. So it's very direct. How did the beneficiary customer perceive the service that they have received? In total, there are 22 measures, so basically 22 questions. And in terms of the contribution, service quality is really the dominant way of thinking in the service literature, and service performance is more like a kind of a rival concept. In terms of its application, service quality helps us identify the gaps, the service quality shortfalls. whereas service performance help us assess the overall service quality. So when we've looked at both of them and we were thinking in terms of how could we adapt this to our validation process, service quality was much more complicated. So we said, okay, let's go for service performance because it required less adaptation. So this is a step in terms of actually doing the service performance or the HUMSERVPERF, Humanitarian service performance. So step one was really looking at the questionnaire, modifying it, and then going through with a humanitarian organization, which in our case was the Department of Disaster and Prevention Management at the Ministry of Interior in Thailand, because they have the jurisdiction over disaster issues in the country. So we did the classic translation and then back translation to make sure, receives a comment, propose a second iteration, and then started testing, started validating the questionnaire. So we also ask both Thai volunteers, Thai officials, also foreign NGO workers that were working in that specific area. And at the end of the day, we had in total 4 iterations of the questionnaire. And then we sent it to all the respondents to validate. That's a key point here, is that we are at the validation stage. So we just wanted to validate to make sure that they understood and they could respond. And now we are really at this stage of ready to be tested and validated. So here is just to show you the process that we went through. For example, in dimension of tangibility, if you were looking at a classic service performance questionnaire, it would have been like the name of the company has up-to-date equipment. And then in the HUMSERVPERF, what we initially proposed was, yeah, the relief organization has to have up-to-date equipment that is ready to use. And this was basically based on the respondents' input to us, is that sometimes the equipment is up to date, but it doesn't work or it has not been maintained. So these are things that we had to do to take into account, and certain things doesn't work, such as physical facilities. No, it doesn't work. So we just took it out. So we really adapted it for the case that we were looking at. So validating context, where did we do the testing? So we did it in Tak province in an allocation area called Masot at the border with Myanmar. This is an area that regularly, every year, especially during the rainy season, there's a lot of floods. So we've specifically targeted floods in this validation process. So this is a context, yes, floods every year, and many issues. And strangely enough, it occurs every year. And the role of this the Department of Disaster Prevention and Management at Masot is really the main government agency. Just to help explain to you a bit the Thai context, if you are a humanitarian organization in Thailand and you want to provide aid, first of all, you need to be registered with this agency. And you need to ask approval from this agency if you're going to go in and provide help. So it's a very centralized way of providing aid. So really, this is the main government agency that is able to coordinate. And because it's a Ministry of Interior, it has a lot of power. And this is the humanitarian supply chain structure, where HQ refers to headquarters, SAO refers to the frontline units of the DDPM. And what we see is you have this relationship with regional suppliers at headquarters, but also working with local suppliers, local donors, and then the counterpart in terms of the beneficiary are usually the village headman, because we have this administrative structure where every village has a headman in the country. And in fact, they're being paid. They receive like a stipend from the Ministry of interior. So this is a structure where you see the information flow, there's also some money flow, and then the relief supply flow. In terms of actual operation, a lot of challenges, not only the actual terrain or the physical characteristic, but one thing that we have observed in collecting data, not only from the DDPM, but also by talking with the various beneficiaries, is that in the preparedness phase, there's really very limited opportunity to talk with the government official. So the preparedness training didn't really occur, which maybe this is something that we should put a lot more emphasis. But on the other hand, the staff of the government agency said, yes, but we've already contacted the village head about we're going to do training, but no response. So it shows here that there's already a kind of a gap, communication gap between the government agency and the beneficiary, even though they have institutional links. So the flood warnings then, well, it wasn't very easy because it was difficult to communicate. Then when comes a flood, we are at the response phase. And because it's dirt road, you cannot access bridges. Bridge was cut. So the government agency could not access the village during the flood. And when you arrive at the reconstruction phase, it's the village headmen themselves. Now they go outside to ask for assistance. And it's really, they do it on their own, through their own network, with their friends, talking, asking for donation, with the relief supplies, heavy machinery to repair the bridge. And then the government agency just come a bit later on because they were also busy with other villagers. And then finally, they start all working together. The villagers, the government agency staff, and the outsiders, which are the volunteers or the local donors, to come and help repair buildings with local materials that they could collect. So what are some of the lessons? And this is really from the case perspective. So yes, complex nature of disaster proved that, promise of on-time and reliable relief service, as well as the delivery of perfect information, are almost impossible to fulfill. The relief staff themselves, they are the hope, but because the village has been cut, they really have no other choice but to wait. And when the water has gone down, then it's the headman, the villager that goes outside. So from the perspective of the beneficiaries, the overall service quality, when they looked at the government organization, was in fact quite low. However, and this is something that is totally in contrast with the commercial or the marketing literature, at the end of the day, the beneficiary will still continue to use the services of the government agency. So it's a bit like that trap. It's a prisoner's dilemma. They're not really happy with the service that they're receiving, but they don't really have a choice. So yes, they still have hope that they will still receive services from the government agency. But one keyword was very much highlighted. It's the word courtesy. Is that these respondents, these villagers said, staff should be humble and behave with dignity to avoid any negative sentiment. And I think this is a bit similar to the case of Singapore, even though we are in a different location. And what we've observed was basically there were 3 perception gaps that we were able to obtain from this validation of the HUMSERVPERF. So the first perception gap was between headquarters and the site. The second perception gap was between the frontline government officers and the sites. And the third perception gap was between the headquarters at the district and the perception gap with the frontline people that are working at the sub-district. So what are these gaps? So the first gap is really this difference in perception between beneficiary perception of actual relief service quality and the headquarters perception of beneficiaries' perception. And that's, I think, very interesting. The headquarters that is sitting, that is managing all of their staff in Thammasat district, well, they believe that all the beneficiaries were helped fairly and equally by their staff. But from a beneficiary perspective, no, that is not true. They felt that it wasn't sufficient, and the frontline staff of the agency came after the village headman was able to gather his own, help. So that's the first gap. The second gap is this difference between the beneficiary perception of actual service quality provided by the agent of the government agency and the staff themselves in terms of how they provided their services. So it's really from an operational difference level. The frontline staff perceived that they provided good relief aid. So they did the maximum, no problem with that. They did their best. But from a beneficiary perspective, they said, yeah, but the quality wasn't that good. So basically trying to say they were able to do it on their own, and the help that came in maybe wasn't so good. And the last one, it's the perception between the headquarters and their own staff that are working at the front line. And this shows again that there's a lack, there's a mismatch here, because the emergency supplies and equipment prepared in the preparedness stage was insufficient for the frontline staff. And there was a lack of these facilities. So that frustrated the frontline staff. So if I was to summarize, the headquarters or the chief sitting at the district level thought that they were doing a very good job, but the villagers said, not really. The frontline staff also said, not really. And then you have this gap between the frontline staff and the beneficiaries themselves. So these are some of the initial results. But the contribution is really this, of this HUMSERVPERF, is that it could be used. It could be used to further look at the perspective of service quality to make sure that relief services are sufficient. And it looks at intangible issues, because we're looking at beneficiary satisfaction of relief services. So it can be used as a supplement to those already hard developed indicators that exist, and can also help improve from a qualitative perspective the services provided by the various service operations. So that may also increase, when you have testimonials from those that have received the aid, that could also help to raise fund or ensure long-term funding. And it could also be a mechanism so that relief organizations are more aware of the perspective or the perception of the beneficiaries themselves. So it's really about probably completing more than just focusing on or replacing any existing indicator. So with this, I would like to end my presentation. But before I do that, I would like also to say that the slides will be shared through the HELiX or the AHA website. We just had a discussion with Ratna a few moments ago. So we will send it up there so that you can download. And if you want to contact us, you have our contact details here under. And yes, we are open for feedback and comments. So what I will do is go to the question on the chat and maybe go through them one by one. What do you think, Huay Ling?
Yep, sure. I'm fine with this format. Yes.
Okay, so
I answered a few on the chats.
Oh, you already answered a few on the chat? Okay. So which one you have not answered from the chat? Or you have answered, or you had time to answer all yours?
Okay, no, maybe just to add on, I think Chatani, right? If I pronounce the name, he gave very good suggestion about how we can close up the gap between what the beneficiary needs and what we are supplying to them, right? So he also mentioned that by mapping the the profile of the beneficiary, we might be able to more effectively meet their needs. Correct, definitely at the broad level, this has been done, but a lot of times it's also, you know, the information exchange between what the beneficiary really needs versus, and also wary of what the donors are actually giving. So there's still a gap, even though at a broad level they are doing it. So currently they are looking at how to, you know, integrate or using some system or technology to bridge this gap. Yeah. So, and also I think there was some question on how did I, for that pilot project, we use really very much going to the site, to the field, we talk to the beneficiaries and understanding them, right? So again, I must say that yes, the beneficiaries' needs and preference might be different, but I would say same. They are not so different, so to speak. Again, right? At the end of the day, they are still based on that project. It can be so-called projected to fit the other estates. In terms of what the beneficiary would generally need, right? So for example, snacks and biscuits, I would think is an oversupply a lot of times from food bank context, right? Rather than the staples and the rice, like rice and noodles are lesser, right? So it's how to bridge what the donors are giving right now. Yeah, I think that's all.
Yeah,
about that.
Okay, so that means, should we donate instant noodle? No.
Instant noodle is actually considered stable.
Okay.
But of course, moving forward, they are not only, also the portion about the nutritious, they are also looking at providing more nutritious meals. So they are really looking at the, you know, the nutritious plate from our Ministry of Health to really cater to that kind of a proper meal in terms of the various different types of nutrition to the beneficiary. But traditionally, instant noodles, as far as I know, when we were working at that this food bank warehouse, is considered stable, but definitely not instant noodles every meal.
Okay, thank you. So I think I have a question from Ali here, talking about the population, the need, which is different, so on and so forth. So just to say, if you look at the presentation I made, it's really we're trying to test and validate. And one of the limitations, the first limitation, is that we have adapted the HUMSERVPERF to the flood situation. So already, you know, that has restricted, that has narrowed it down. And I think if I'm not mistaken, we tested, we validated with about like 10, 12 respondents. So it is still not enough to have any meaningful data to analyze. We are just confident that they know how to answer the question and that we can input the data and then do the analysis. And this is really the next step of the research. What we are also considering is that, is it possible to have like a kind of a common or a standard part for the HUMSERVPERF? So this is something again that we're struggling with, because we adapted it, like I said, in the case of sudden onset natural, which are the floods. So yeah, it's a very, I think, challenging question, and to answer, I don't think we'll be able to develop like a real standard HUMSERVPERF, but we could provide the guidelines to at least have the main things it. Okay. Okay, Chantani, okay. Has never taken the service mind course as we did. Okay. Yeah, well, I don't think we're here to bash the government, even though we would like to. But it also shows this, is that the mindset also needs to change when we talk about humanitarian relief. That I think this is the key word. And I remember when we did the discussion, there was one response that really, I think, summed it up for me, when one of the villagers said, you know, our village was underwater, people come and help us. We are a bit like beggars. We cannot be choosers, which I don't think that is the right perspective. But you know, this impression that came, and also maybe because of the way how they were treated, maybe not as a priority because the village headman wasn't close to the local politician. This is something I don't know. But if you're a professional, then yes, you know, everyone is the same, and that's why they were asking about courtesy, or at least, you know, the dignity of being treated correctly by the agency. Then Catherine has this.
May I also add on, Ruth?
Yes, yes, please.
Yeah. So for the food bank project, that's why in the last few summary slide, I think one key takeaway from the entire project was also the power of using VOC because at the end of the day, we are hoping that the beneficiary feel that they are not like cornered, they got no choice, right? We want to give them the dignity of choice based on what they really need and, you know, what they prefer. So the vending machine, you can imagine going to a vending machine, they are very excited, in fact, with the new launch. Going to the just like any kid, go to a vending machine, I can actually choose what I want to drink, what I want to eat, right? So this is, I have a choice here. So I think the dignity of choice, the dignity is a key thing now. Yeah, I think that gels well with the service perspective a lot, right? Thank you. Sorry for jumping in.
No worries. Yeah, so from Catherine, is it possible to have the beneficiary survey tool? Yeah, just send me an email, and then we can talk, because what we want to do is we want to deploy the tool even more. So I think that would be helpful for us too. And dissatisfaction is expressed. How does the team deal with it? Well, you know, when we went in as a university doing research, so, you know, we are not taking part or not representing anyone. So it's all about the feedback, even though, you know, our main objective was to test and validate the tools. But of course, these comments also, we shared them back, and we shared them back with the agency. And yeah, some of them, especially at the higher level, basically said, oh yes, these people are never happy. Okay, sure, fine. But what is very interesting is the people on the front line, the people from the agency working in the front line, where they say, oh, they didn't know that they were perceived that way, and they will improve the communication and be more courteous, because they, at the end of the day, it's these people from the government agency that goes and help them. So it is very important that they have a good rapport, a good relationship. So yes, she has the guidance tools. In fact, we're trying to publish the paper at the moment, so we have a draft. So yes, Lucy, if you want, send me an email, and then we can talk about this. Question about perception could be subjective. Okay. So yeah, that's why. That's what I say, is that the HUMSERVPERF at the end of the day will not replace any of those quantitative indicators that are being used during relief operation, but it can provide some insight into the perception, what is happening, the feeling of the beneficiaries themselves. So normally, from a statistical perspective, how we ensure objectivity in service quality measurement is about having a large number of respondents, right? So there's a whole methodology part in there. And like I've said, if you want a copy of the draft, or if you want to work with us on this, yeah, please do drop me a line, send me an email, and I'm sure that we can contribute even more. Yes, so Ratna is asking, yeah, we can enable the video. We have 15 minutes, so and interact with the speaker. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, please feel free to unmute yourself. I think it's easier that way, in fact. Right.
Yes, correct, Dr. Ruth and Dr. Huay. So now participants, we are enabling you to unmute yourself if you want to ask directly to the speakers, and also to open your video if you wish. But please make sure to raise your hand so Dr. Ruth will aware that you are wanting to ask some questions or give some comments. Thank you.
Or maybe Ratna, you can help us and identify who has raised their hand.
Yeah, sure.
For this case study, is there any way?
Yeah, meanwhile waiting, I think there is one more question from Abdul Malik in the chat.
Okay.
Yes.
This case study is a community-based approach. For the question is for me or for Huay Ling? If it's for me, this is what I would like to say. If you look at the institutional structure within Thailand, it is supposed to be community-based with the village headman working with the government agency or its representative. The only problem might be that, yeah, that's what's written in the paper, but it's not actually being done for whatever reason, for budget reason or because they don't get along. This is something I don't know. Huay Ling?
Yes, for me, I think just now the slide with a lot of bubbles, I kind of skimmed through it very quickly. Yes, there is a community-based approach. So even actually with the onset of COVID, right, that we see that there's more so-called community-based network that come forth. So they are more supportive or even want to volunteer their service to so-called close up the gaps even between all these so-called charities. Sometimes charities, only look at their own group of so-called beneficiaries. That, for example, in one estate, right, in a more lower income estate, they can put multiple charities serving that. So those beneficiaries do not worry about their needs in terms of nutrition. But in fact, there are those households that actually spill across the island, embedded in those estates that are actually insecure. So if there were more information transfer, more sharing of information, and all this cutting down of duplication can be done, and at the end of the day, we attain so-called optimum efficiency and meet the beneficiary needs more effectively. Yeah, that's going forward. That's what hopeful that can be done. Yeah.
Okay, there's another question here. From Poti.
Hi, Poti.
Hi. So yeah, well, when we started doing this, thinking about this focus session, we didn't realize that at the end of the day, I think the message is similar.
Yes.
We didn't realize that. It's only when we started discussing what are you going to present, what am I going to present, and we ended up saying, hey, hang on a minute. It's about the beneficiary. It's about how do we understand their need. We give them some sort of dignity. All these things which initially we didn't. And maybe it could be an interesting idea to show that in two very different contexts. At the end of the day, it's really about the beneficiaries.
And in fact, at the top of my mind, I was thinking probably the instrument can also be administered, in food bank context moving forward to more effectively really assess how we are, because what we have done is a pilot study within an estate. Let's say we launch this, when food bank launched this in a larger scale, we could also explore, looking at how to use this instrument to really understand their perception of the current service, so to speak, in terms of food bundling that is provided to them. Right. Thank you for the question.
And then there's a question from Shihiro. Having access to those that are vulnerable. Let me share with you. What I have shown here is the first phase. In the second phase, we collaborated with an international NGO who was looking after a village of refugees from Myanmar that were on the Thai side. So they are the minority, and the government officials do not go there, and the villagers do not want the Thai government Thai government officers to go there. So we used the help of this NGO to go in, this foundation to go in, and then collect data based on the HUMSERVPERF. So you're right. It is very important to be able to access all types of beneficiaries, and it is not always easy. And there are, first of all, a number of gatekeepers, but there are also issues related to, do they trust the people that will come? Are they willing to talk? And you know, this group of Myanmar people were in fact, like, I think Christian, that were persecuted and had to move across the border. So yes, it is possible to do that, but a lot of negotiation, a lot of preparation is needed in order to be able to get access. Yeah.
Access can be an issue.
Yeah, negotiating, yes.
And even as we're talking about technology use, right, to integrate what the beneficiary needs, a lot of times the fact is those that are so-called the minority do not even have access to, you know, to, in order to feedback that they need. So that's the challenge. How do we actually reach them? But even though we could have advanced technology, right? If they can never get linked up, there's really, you know, that's the reach is limited. Right?
I saw a hand raised. Chantani, B.
Yes.
Show your face.
Morning, everyone. Okay, just to add that to the part of the inclusive of the beneficiary that is ethnic. In the stage of emergency, I think it is difficult to do so, but in the stage of the preparedness, when you do the identifying of the potential beneficiary, and then you can do kind of the survey of how many people are there, what are the ethnic, and then what are the food preference that the beneficiary is needed. It may be help in that stage. That's all from me.
Thank you.
So Chantani is someone very important in the community. She has helped the Rohingyas in the shelter. So she has this first-hand experience with that.
The supply. I'm seeing one more question for the food bank. Actually, okay. There's a lot of overwhelming. I must say there's different phase. When toilet paper, tissue paper, rice all run out at the point of, at the onset of the pandemic, definitely no supplies, you know, because even households are limited in supplies. But right now, right, people are more conscious about the community needs, in fact, and more aware of the need to cut down food waste, and more aware of what the beneficiaries actually should be provided with a lot more advocacy that's been done through education institution, as well as community effort, as well as government agency, right, in Singapore context. There's a lot more, we see that, in fact, and because a lot of people I would say the work from home state, I think the circuit breaker, more people are working from home. They give them with more free time to actually have the time to so-called provide service in terms of resources, as well as donating to food bank. So in fact, I would say it has really been quite okay, right? In terms of supplies, in terms of donation to food support network in Singapore, yeah, like food bank during this pandemic time, yeah. I think Singapore, in one sense, is fortunate because the main bulk of the population are still, you know, able to support. Yeah. Okay, I shall give my email as well.
This is for those who want to contact us directly this afternoon. So I think we basically have 5 minutes left. I think Ratna said we needed to take like a group photo. Is that my understanding?
Yes.
Before we leave. So you want to see everyone's face, or how do you want to do that?
Yes. Everyone, please, you may start your video so we can see your smiles and take a picture together.
Thank you for the attention and all the questions. They are very interesting. Help us to think deeper as well.
Hi, Kong.
Okay, still waiting for others to open the video.
Okay, you're driving?
Yeah, I'm driving.
Hello.
What is multitasking?
Drive safe, keep safe. Stay well, everyone, and keep safe. We are in challenging times, but interesting as well. Open up a lot more opportunities, right? And for example, here, to be able to see each other on one single frame.
Okay, in 3, 2, 1. Smile again. 3, 2, 1. Okay, very good. Nice pictures.
Good.
Thank you.
You happy with the picture, Ratna?
Yes, very happy.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr.
Okay, very good. So I think on this note, I would like to, first of all, say thank you to all the participants of this focus session. I hope it was interesting for you, and hopefully we can further the discussion after this this HELiX event, because it's this is really just a starting point. And in ASEAN, it is very important that humanitarian organization, academia, and government, we need to work together more closely, and we all have our own specific role, and we can contribute to each other in terms of, at the end of the day, helping the beneficiaries. A word of thanks to my colleague, co-presenter, Huay Ling, and I give you also a few minutes to say a few words.
I think you have rounded up very well, Ruth, and thank you for the opportunity as well to HELiX. I hope that this spirit will continue in our HELiX, in our DNA to share in such platforms. Thank you for all the attention and sharing and inputs as well. Thank you.
Okay, Ratna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ruth and Dr. Huay Ling. This is a very interesting topic, and I see that many participants are actively participating. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time and also active participation. So we will conclude today for this session, and we will see you again in the next event of iPitch and also closing session. Goodbye, everyone. Have a great day.
Stay safe.
Thank you.
Take care.
Yeah.